In the last part, we have already seen how the pages are created, how the controls can be added onto the page, and where to link the page in the Pages screen. Now, in this part, we learn how to bind the grid onto this page. As mentioned in the previous session, we are using the W2 UI grid. So, let us go through with this session, where we will see how to bind the grid onto the page. Create a grid onto the UI on this page. What I will do is, I'll just go back to my page, and here, I'll create a few variables for me. Let's say grid select div is equal to null, and this .dgrid is equal to null. This will be the container for my grid, and this will be the grid itself. And then I'll create a few columns for my grid, an array of a column over here, where I will add a few columns to my grid. And now, in the initialize component, when this page is called, we have this init function, and the initialize, we have initialized the design, we have loaded on the left-hand side. And now, in case of a grid, I'll add one more function to display the grid. For that, I will use this.display is equal to function, this one. And here, I'll call this .display function after I have loaded the design. Because, for the grid, we need a little timeout so that our design is loaded, and we can load the grid. At the time of the page, when the page opens for the first time, we want to display the list of the customers that is already saved into the database. So, we need to fetch that detail from the database and display the data onto the UI. For that, I'll create another function over here. Let's say function getCustomerData, and we'll do an AJAX call. And in the display, we will call this getCustomerData function. And we'll bind that customer data into the grid. Here, what I will do is, in the getCustomerData, I'll do an AJAX call. AJAX URL is vis.application.context URL plus our controller. And the name of the function, let's say getCustomerData. And type is post and async false. Success, function, the result. And in case of error, we want to handle the error over here. In case there is an error, we'll handle the error over here. In the success, we will just fetch the data. Result is equal to json.parse this response over here. And then, once we fetch the response, we'll bind the grid. We'll create another function to bind the grid, which we'll call at the initialize. And later on, when we save the data, save the customer as well. And after that, getCustomerData, we are using this AJAX call. And then we'll bind the grid. We'll write another function to bind the grid. Let's say bind grid. And it is having this parameter. We'll pass this parameter over here for the data, and we'll write the code here. Bind the grid with the data fetched. Now, this AJAX call, we have to write the controllers, which will be fetching the data from the server side. For that, we'll write the controllers into our controller section to fetch the data from the server side. So, what I will do is, I'll just copy this controller name and add a new controller into the area section over here. Add an empty MVC controller. This name, click on Add. This controller I have added over here, public JSON result, and the function name, getCustomerData, without any parameters. It's up to us how we want our code to be executed or what is our requirement. So we use this context over here. This context is required from session context. We'll fetch the session from the context as CTX. The same syntax we have used in the controllers for the callouts as well. We'll return JSON and JSON convert. We'll use this namespace.serialize object, and we'll pass the value over here. JSON request.behavior.allowGet. So, in case of get, we also fetch this value. So, we'll write our logic into the model classes. Models. We'll write in this model folder. I'll add one model class for this customer. Let's say, class customer model. Add it over here. And here, I'll write one function. Let's say, public string get customer data. And we'll fetch the context parameter over here. So that when we write certain query over here, it'll give us the response. And now, from here, we'll say customer model at the namespace. We'll write our business logic in the model class. And from this customer model get customer data function, context is passed as a parameter, like this. So in the customer data, we'll add one class. So in that class, we'll use or we'll create some properties. Public class customer data. We'll create a few properties over here in this, which we want for our grid. Let's say name of the customer. Copy another one. The primary key, so that later on, in certain cases, we might need it to update the record. We have group ID. Then, business partner group will display into the grid. It will be a string. Then, string for search key, which is a value column. Then, we have description, which we are adding from the control onto the UI. And another value for payment term. Again, a string. What are the columns we want to have in the records of an integer? How many records are there onto this particular data? Now we want to bind the grid with all the customers that are saved onto the database. So what I will do is, in this tenant, here I will create a list and return to link or bind with the grid. I'll create a list, and then I will return that list over here, customer details. Now, I'll write a query to get all the customers from the database. SQL equals to select bp.value, description, name as customer, CB partner ID, and group ID, business partner group. And then we are also fetching the payment terms. So, in case of Oracle, I'll also provide here as NBL, if there is a payment term, as it is a non-mandatory column earlier. In case if there is no value for the payment term, we will fetch this payment term from C_B partner. BP is our alias. And here, we'll apply the joins. As this is a mandatory column in CB partner, we can apply the inner join bpgroup.id equals to bpgroup_id, payment term, business partner dot payment term ID, var bp dot client ID equals to. We'll fetch the tenant from context. And is active check for the business partners and is customer. We'll fetch only the customers. Order by created. This is a query for fetching the business partner details or the customer details. Now, I'll get this into the data set using system.data. We'll add the namespace. This is the framework function db.execute dataset to execute the queries and fetch the result, like this. Now, I'll apply the checks. There is any rows, and then apply the loop. customer data initialize once more. And in the customer data, I'll fetch all the values. Let's say business partner group is equals to value of string. We'll type first the data we are fetching from the data set from this column. Similarly, business partner ID. This is an integer. Then the business partner group ID. Then the names for the customer over here. Fetching the value from the customer. Value for the search key. Then the description in the payment term. And finally, the record count. Say this. It is up to you how and which columns you want to fetch. And finally, adding this into this customer details, which we are returning to the controller. Add customer data. Variable, we are adding the customer details and fetching the customer details and returning to the AJAX call that we have called from the client side. If you build this and refresh the link. Now let's see whether we fetch the data. I'll open the console and apply a breakpoint over here, this function, this AJAX call, and if I refresh the link again, to see whether I am receiving the data from the server side. Here, as you can see, I have all the details for all the customers. This one. But in the bind grid, I haven't written any code to bind the grid as of now. What I will do is, I'll write the code to bind the grid now. In the add customer function, we are getting the data in this grid data result. Now, what we will do is, we will write the code to bind the grid. For that, record data is equals to, let's say this, and count is equals to 1. And apply loop over here. I is equals to 0. I is less than data.length. Then, loop through the lines. If you return line over here, and in the line, whatever the properties we are getting from the server side, we will use it over here, data i.cb partner ID, and name into the name column, search into the search column, business partner group, the business partner group, then description, in the description column. Then we have, let's say, payment term, the payment term, then record count. We are fetching, I'll pass a fixed value over here right now, and the record ID, which we'll be using as a counter for the number of records, and increment this, and then we are passing this data onto the line. After we have created this array, which will be passed to the data grid, we'll check if self.grid is not equals to null. Then we'll first create the grid again, destroy, and is equals to null. Then if we have initially created the array list of columns.length, if it is 0, we'll create the columns which we want to display onto the grid. Let's say $self.ArrayList columns.push. So we can create the columns over here, let's say field as record ID, and caption record ID, then sortable. These are a few settings at the column level that you can define for the grid. This is the column size, how much width a particular column can have in a grid, minimum as 150, and hidden as true. As it is up to us which columns we want to display to the user and the columns which we want to hide. So, this is the CB partner ID over here. Sortable as true, width as sizes 33%, minimum 150, hidden we don't want to display this column. Then, another column is the name, which will be displayed to the user, and sortable true. width or size is 20%. And this is hidden. False, as we want to display this column to the user, and few other columns as well. Let's say value, and the caption which will be displayed at the column header. Then, the BP group. This column will be mapped, which is passed here in the field section. Group description over here, and the payment term like this. And then finally, after writing these columns, record data is equals to W2 utils dot encode tags, so that there are no scripts that get executed within the grid. And finally, we will bind the grid over here is equals to $self.grid selective into the div. We will bind this W2 grid. And here, we will pass these values over here. That's the name of the grid. Grid customer underscore. You can pass your own prefix over here and self.window number so that you get a unique name for your grid. Record height 40 and show select column so that you see checkbox in front of each row, multi-select as true, and then columns, array list columns, and records as records data over here. Here, what we have done is we fetched the data from the server side and we created an array of all these data. Then we created column headers if it is not already created, and then we pass that information to that grid, that this W2 grid. You can use this information, or you can fetch this details, how a grid should be linked, and what are the other options that you have for the grid, how the grids can be bind, and how you can render the columns into the grid, or maybe if you can use any third-party library to bind the grid. Right now, as we mentioned, we are using this W2 UI grid. That's why we are displaying this like I have shown here. One more thing to consider here is, when you are using the W2 UI grid, you have to use this window.set timeout. So that it gets some time for displaying the grid onto the UI, we will use this like this. Now this will show you the grid onto the UI and bind the data for the grid. We have already fetched the data from the server side, and now we are binding the grid onto the UI with the code that we have written. We have built the code. Let us just refresh the link. So, the grid didn't display over here. Let us see if there is something wrong. If I just inspect this, and we are not fetching this from the jQuery object over here, it has to be fetched from here. And also, we haven't added the container for this grid onto the right side panel. On the left side, we have added all the controls, but on the right side, this section needs to have this grid. $self.grid selective is equals to $. Here, tip ID equals to grid selective underscore plus $self.window number to make it unique. And we will also define a class where we will define the properties for this grid, foreign-grid outer wrap, and close it. After that, append this to the right side section. Append $self.grid selective. We have added this grid onto the right side for 80% of the portion, and now we'll add this class where we'll define some properties so that this grid is displayed onto the UI in the proper shape. For that, what I will do is I'll add one class, let's say, in the contents folder. We will have all the CSS classes. I'll add a CSS class, this style sheet, with the name of, let's say, add_customer.css. I'll clear this class, which I have applied onto my border as 1 pixel solid, RGBA. These are the variables for our standard framework classes, so that we can have the framework colors on secondary. You can define your own colors, own fonts for this float, let's say, right height, as we'll define, or we will specify some space from or margin. so that it doesn't contain the whole space over there onto the UI. And width as a little space from the borders, 20 pixels, let's say. This is the class that we want to be applied onto the grid container, and we have defined this class over here. Now, the class, all the CSS defines over here, has to be defined into this src folder over here as we are implementing the Webpack. We'll import this add customer.css. Now I'll build this and refresh the link. So, as you can see, now the grid is loaded with the data that is fetched from the server side. If I open the page again, so this is how the grid data is being loaded onto the grid. Now, let's see if we can add another record into this table from the UI. For that, we need a Save button from here. When we click on the Save button, all the information, the name, the description, and the business partner group is saved into this customer table. For that, what we will do is we'll add a button onto this UI on the left-hand side. If I go back to my customer.css and on the left-hand section, what I'll do is I'll add a div, margin top as 10 pixels, and $self.save button. I'll add the standard HTML control as of now. Input ID, let's say, save button underscore window number, class is equals to vis underscore. This is a framework class for the buttons. It is up to you if you want to have your own class, let's say va001 underscore buttons, and type is equals to button, then value is equals to save. So, this text you can fetch from the message screen. Right now, I am passing this value as its value over here, and this save button, I'll bind onto this left section. First of all, div button section, dot append this save button, and then I'll bind this left side section, dot append div button section, and I'll declare this at the top, where I have declared all my variables, so that I can link the events onto this. Once I have appended this button over here, what I will do is I'll bind the events with this as well. I'll write a function, bind events over here, and in the bind events, what I will do is I'll bind the event over the save button over here. For that, I will do self.save button, .onClick function, and let's say alert implement save logic here. So first of all, we also need to bind the class onto the button. We have added one more class onto this, that is this buttons class. This one, let it into our CSS file. Here margin left as 10px. If you build this, and now refresh the link. You can see the button is there now. When I click on this, I get this message, implement save logic here. So what we want to achieve is, when user enters the name of a customer, description, and the business partner group, based on this detail, the record gets saved into the database on the customer master screen, and also this grid gets refreshed. So let's see how we can achieve this. I'll go back to my code, into the JS file. Here I'll remove this code, and instead of writing the AJAX call from scratch, I'll copy this code on the save button. I'll call this controller and save customer data function. Write another function for this. Earlier, in the other case, we were not passing any data, but now what we'll do is we'll pass the data over here. Let's say name from self.customerName, .getValue, business partner group ID, from business partner category field that we have added onto the UI, and description from the description text box, customer description.getValue. So these controls that we have used from the onPredict framework will have these options where you can fetch the values from these controls with the getValue property. And here we are fetching this result. I'll keep it same, where the new customer being added is also added to the list and fetch the data, and the grid is being loaded again with the fresh data. Now, we need to create this controller for the save customer data. So I'll go back to my customer details controller, add JSON result again with this function save customer data, which has these parameters, a name, then integer of this business partner group ID, and then string. The third parameter is description. I'll use the context as well. We need the model to write a business logic, and then this particular function, I'll have the get customer data over here. This we will be returning back to the JavaScript class. But before that, we need to save the customer's data. For that, I'll write another class over here, another function, let's say, save customer data. We will pass context and name, BP group ID, and description for this function, save customer data. So in the save customer data, we will write in our model class, public string save customer data. And here we are having three parameters, context, name, BP group ID, description. So these are the parameters that we are passing from this save customer data function over here. And here, to save the data in our table, we have this MB partner class. This is the table for CB partner table. We'll save the data context. The second parameter is 0 to save a new record, and the transaction. So we'll not use the transaction now, if not bp.save, and in case it is not saved, we will write the message into the log files, and we can return a message simply saying not save. We can pick this message from the message screen as well. And here, return blank if it saves successfully. Or maybe how we can pick the message from the message window is message.get, message context, the message key with your module prefix, customer not saved. In this case, you have to pass the entry into the message screen. Now, in the business partner, what we'll do is bp.setName. We'll set the name as the name being fetched or passed from the client side. Business partner group ID into C_BP group ID, and bp.set description as description, and bp.set is customer. So this is a checkbox, so it will be passed as true. We are not fetching this value from the jQuery class. We will pass this value from as a fixed value onto this UI. Now, there are a few other columns which I am setting directly as a fixed value. Let's say payment term ID. If we can see what is the payment term for this, let's say customer master screen. These are few mandatory columns. Right now, we have not created any controls onto the UI for these columns. I am passing the fixed values for these. So if I go to a particular record, let's say this one, price list, say price list, I'll check the ID for this, 1000178. Price list ID 1000178. And the payment term, let's say 50% immediate, 50% in 30 days, 108. And another column is VA 009 underscore payment method ID. This one, let's say MasterCard. Value for this is 5. Right now, I am passing this fixed value. It's up to you. What are the values you want to have for this data, which you are saving into this table? It's up to your logic, how you write the logic to save the data into the fields. So we have written this logic to save the customer, and after saving the customer, we are fetching the whole data again in the sorting order. So we should get the customer that we are saving at the end. In the grid, it should display at the top. So let's see how this code works. Now let me add another customer. Let's say Jamie Overton. This is a new customer in NY region. Business partner group as customer. These checkboxes are true. And now when I save the record, you can see this record being added here. So when we save the record, we pass these values, and this customer gets saved, and this grid is loaded. Now these controls we haven't refreshed That's why these values are displaying. It's up to the logic, how you write. I just want to show you how the data is saved onto the table. So this is how you can create your pages and write your logic to save the data, to fetch the information from any table, and display into the grid, and perform such operations. You can create your own buttons, write your logic onto that, create these framework controls. Again, if I search for this new customer here, as you can see, this customer is also fetched from this control. So this behaves in the same way as these controls are there onto the screen. Now if we see, this customer is added onto the backend in the customer details page. For customer master to this, as you can see, this customer is there under the UI as well, with all the values that we have passed from the page. So this is how you can create the page at the UI with the jQuery code that we have. Please follow part 3 of the Pages session for the use of child dialogues onto the pages, how we can use the child dialogues, and how we can use the C-frames portion of the pages that we can also use while creating pages. Until now, we have seen a display that we have created. This page is open from the menu. There are options also available in the framework, where we can open the page from the button on the screen. We also will cover that in the part 3 of the Pages session. That concludes this session. Thank you for attending.